If you're inspo tanks, and make no mistake, you've come to the right place. Just give Tennelle the time to straight up blow your mind with a new show of drawing a blank.
Hi everyone, hope you're having a good day. This week I've got a bit of a shorter video for y'all, and this time we're going to be talking about drawing eyes for animation. The animation community here on YouTube comes from a lot of different backgrounds. Some artists are more classically trained, some have done their own research into the field of animation through books and tutorials, and some artists are completely self-taught. As someone who has gotten where I am thanks to all three of these types of training, I know there's a lot of things I wish someone had just been around to tell me that there was a way I could make my work better. And I get asked a lot for tutorials on how to draw this or how to draw that, but I don't really ever want to come across as an artist who pushes their way of drawing onto others, even accidentally. So when I do give art advice on my channel, I try to come at it from this perspective, and I hope that people understand. I always get a mix of comments on these videos of either people saying, "Thank you for saying this, this is so helpful," or the other extreme of, "You can't tell me how to draw, I'll put as many spots and stripes on my cat as I want." So I just want to remind people that my advice in these videos is never meant to be taken as some kind of gospel truth. These quote-unquote rules of art, so to speak, that I pass along are just bits of common knowledge that can be really helpful if everyone knows them, so that people are on the same page. And then you can take that knowledge and decide what to do with it yourself. Art rules are made to be broken after all, and animation requires a lot of problem solving. But if we all know the basic rules, we can work from that foundation. I preface all of this with that because I know I'm going to step into some sensitive territory here. Let's talk about animating eyes and eye designs in animation. People like drawing eyes. People really like drawing eyes. Even people who mostly view art as a casual hobby usually like to draw eyes. Humans are naturally drawn to eyes, and in the same way that we can connect to people by looking them in the eye, we can learn a lot from characters by watching their eyes and empathize with them. Eyes are the window into the soul, and if you're going to mess up any part of an animation, you can usually get away with quite a bit, but you do not want to mess up the eyes. That is where you lose even the most casual viewer, because that eye contact, that body language, is hardwired right into our brains. Messing up eye contact, even for a moment, can break the emotional tone of the scene you worked so hard to establish. However, and here's where I might step on some toes, making your eyes overly detailed in your animation can have a similar effect and turn an audience away. Eyes in animated media are often better the simpler they are. There's a general rule in comics that also bleeds into animation that the simpler the character design, the more relatable the character is. So, generic stick figure people that don't have many, if any, discernible traits are easy to project yourself onto. The more features you give someone, the less you can project yourself onto them and they become their own person. Give a stick figure long, wavy hair and dark eyes, and they're now their own person. And this can be a really good thing, but it can also be a detriment if that's not what you're trying to do. You can choose where on this sliding scale of quote-unquote realism you want to be. Some cartoon characters work better with simpler designs. Think of art styles like those you see in your typical 3-panel comic strip. Those characters tend to be avatars that people reading them can relate to. Then we get a little bit more complicated with, for example, shows like Steven Universe, where you can relate to the characters because their body types usually give you some kind of general idea about how they act or how they move. This is a type of, like, character design stereotyping, you know? Then You can keep going on that scale and you get shows like Avatar or She-Ra or The Dragon Prince. And there, like, the tone of the story is more serious. So the extremes in body shapes are toned down a bit, and so on and so on. So what does this have to do with eyes? There's actually been a lot of studies done that show that people with autism tend to connect better with characters that have solid black pupils. And this isn't just some anomaly. Most people connect easier with that kind of character design. We just also usually use those kinds of character designs in things meant for children, and most people tend to think of themselves as being like too old for such and such characters. This usually includes characters like Thomas the Tank Engine, the cast of VeggieTales, Mickey Mouse, and other such shows that use this style of eye design. The simpler the design, the easier it is to connect to the character. The opposite can also be true. Over-designing eyes can make it really difficult to connect to a character and feel like you can relate to them on a personal level. And that can be great and all, but then sometimes there is a mix of these two things that just don't really blend well. And don't even get me started on character designs where everything is mostly really cartoony with exaggerated proportions, but then the eyes have a million details in them to try to make them pretty or more realistic or whatever. It's not that this look can't ever be done correctly. Big moe eyes are their own trope in anime after all. But just like simple black pupils, over-detailed styled eyes should be used sparingly and with purposeful intention, because otherwise you could handicap your tone from just a simple mistake in design choices. As a general rule, I don't really like over-stylized eyes, personally, particularly in animation. In illustration, if you're just trying to give a character beautiful, captivating eyes, that's one thing, but trying to replicate giving characters all kinds of highlights, gradients, shadows, eye shines, maybe giving all of your characters heavy eyeliner or drawing individual eyelashes, etc., over and over in every frame of animation is just asking for more of a headache for your animators, especially when you take into consideration what I said earlier about it being super important that you don't mess up the eye's emotions and sightlines. Because if you notice a mistake later on, that's a lot of extra work to go back and clean that up. Now, this isn't always the case, but there tends to be a kind of idealization of realism in the art world, as if capturing realism is the gold standard that every artist should be striving for. This can come from artists, but this idea is usually a sentiment you hear more from non-artists. And unfortunately, this is just inaccurate, or at least partially. It's true that often animators are trying to capture parts of real life to give their own characters life. Some like to call it a spark of truth to create the illusion of life. Sometimes it's in the movement of an action, subtle expressions, or sometimes it comes down to something more nebulous like a feeling, or even something like color and lighting and things that aren't related to animation at all, but just like the environments the characters are in, or the story. But animation offers more freedom than the constraints of reality, which is why we animate versus just pointing a camera at live actors and calling it a day. But the point I'm trying to get at is that because we tend to be overly focused on eyes as compared to most other human body parts, this idealization of realism can end up going unquestioned when it comes to eye design. My go-to example for this is the dawn of 3D animation. There was a huge push to make everything realistic, and nowadays, that kind of thing just doesn't hold up well. Stylization almost always holds up way better to the test of time. But in general, it's really distracting when you have characters that are stylized, but the eyes have way more detail than anything else. What's really important to keep in mind is what kind of tone you are going for in your animation, and pick eye styles that reflect those choices. For my own art style, at least when we're talking about the cats in Clouded Moon, My thought process is to keep the eyes varied to show off personality, but also to stay away from adding extra unnecessary detail. The complicated part is the shapes, but not the eyes itself. Because the tone of Clouded Moon is more serious, we want each character to feel unique and have their personalities show center stage. But it's also important to us that their emotions are clear, so the eyebrows play a big important part in clear communication of expression. And that's just our choice for this specific project. It's not going to be the answer for everything, or even most things. It's just important to think about why you draw something the way you do, how that affects your, and if we're talking about a group project, others' workflow, and make sure that you're making wise design decisions, even if it means changing things up a bit from how you're used to doing it. Phew, okay, I think that's it. Again, I want to reiterate that these aren't hard rules. They are guidelines to do with as you please, and I hope it's helpful in that regard. So have a wonderful day, everyone, and stay inspired.